How to Master Your Mind, a Descent into the Labyrinth of Consciousness. Welcome, weary pilgrim, to the precipice of a profound journey. A descent not into the depths of the earth, but into the abyssal chasm of your own consciousness. You seek to master your mind, a noble yet perhaps naive aspiration, in a world where the very notion of self-mastery often serves as a gilded cage, a subtle tyranny disguised as liberation. For what is mastery truly, when the master himself is but a fleeting construct, a fragile ego adrift in the boundless ocean of the unconscious? This is not a self-help manual promising quick fixes or superficial triumphs. This is an invitation to confront the shadows, to wrestle with the demons of your own making, and to perhaps, just perhaps, glimpse the terrifying freedom that lies beyond the illusion of control. In an age obsessed with optimization, productivity, and the relentless pursuit of an idealized self, the human mind has become the ultimate frontier, a territory to be conquered, mapped, and exploited. We are told to harness its power, to bend it to our will, to program it for success. Yet beneath the polished veneer of positive affirmations and mindfulness apps, a deeper truth whispers. The mind is not merely a tool to be wielded, but a wild, untamed wilderness, a chaotic symphony of instincts, archetypes, and ancestral echoes. To master it, one must first understand its inherent untamability, its profound resistance to simplistic categorization, and its terrifying capacity for both creation and destruction. Carl Jung, the cartographer of the soul, understood this inherent paradox. He knew that the path to psychological wholeness, to what he termed individuation, was not a linear ascent towards enlightenment, but a perilous descent into the chthonic realms of the unconscious. It was a confrontation with the shadow, the disowned, repressed aspects of ourselves that lurk in the dark corners of our psyche, often manifesting as our greatest fears, our most destructive impulses, and our most profound insecurities. To master the mind, Jung would argue, is not to suppress these shadows, but to integrate them, to bring the light of consciousness to their hidden depths, thereby transforming them from adversaries into allies. It is a process of becoming whole, not perfect. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher of the hammer, would scoff at the very idea of a docile, obedient mind. For him, the mind was a battleground, a crucible where the will to power, the fundamental drive to grow, to overcome, to assert oneself, played out its eternal drama. Mastery, in the Nietzschean sense, is not about taming the mind, but about embracing its inherent wildness, its Dionysian chaos, and channeling its raw energy towards the creation of one's own values, one's own meaning, in a universe devoid of inherent purpose. It is a radical act of self-overcoming, a dance on the precipice of nihilism, where the individual dares to become their own god. Arthur Schopenhauer, the melancholic sage, would remind us of the mind's fundamental subservience to the will, a blind, irrational, and insatiable force that drives all existence. For Schopenhauer, the mind, with all its intellectual prowess, is but a servant to this ceaseless striving, a sophisticated instrument designed to rationalize and fulfill the will's endless desires. To master the mind, then, would be to somehow transcend this relentless will, to find moments of respite from its insatiable demands, perhaps through aesthetic contemplation or ascetic detachment. It is a pessimistic yet profoundly insightful view that challenges the very notion of conscious control. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist, would confront us with the crushing weight of our own freedom. The mind, in his view, is not a fixed entity but a perpetual project, constantly creating itself through its choices. To master the mind, then, is to fully embrace this terrifying freedom, to acknowledge our absolute responsibility for every thought, every feeling, every action in a world without preordained meaning. It is a call to authentic existence, a rejection of bad faith, and a courageous embrace of the anguish that accompanies true liberty. Fyodor Dostoevsky, the explorer of the human soul's darkest recesses, would reveal the mind as a labyrinth of conflicting impulses, a battleground between faith and doubt, good and evil, reason and madness. His characters, tormented by their own thoughts, driven by their passions, and haunted by their moral dilemmas, embody the profound internal struggle that defines the human condition. To master such a mind, Dostoevsky would suggest, is not to impose a rigid order, but to navigate its inherent contradictions with compassion, humility, and a profound understanding of the human capacity for both depravity and redemption. Aldous Huxley, in his dystopian visions, warned of a future where the mind is not mastered but manipulated, controlled, and pacified by external forces. In Brave New World, happiness is engineered through soma and conditioning, effectively neutering the mind's capacity for critical thought, deep emotion, and genuine freedom. His work serves as a chilling reminder that the pursuit of mental mastery, if divorced from ethical considerations and a commitment to authentic human flourishing, can easily devolve into a form of self-imprisonment, a comfortable servitude to manufactured contentment. Finally, Gabor Mate, with his incisive work on trauma and addiction, would highlight how the unmastered mind often becomes a refuge for unaddressed pain, a mechanism for coping with the wounds of the past. The patterns of thought, the compulsive behaviors, the self-sabotaging narratives, these are often desperate attempts to manage unbearable emotional states. To master the mind, in Mate's view, is to embark on a journey of healing, to reconnect with the authentic self that lies beneath the layers of trauma, and to cultivate self-compassion as the foundation for true psychological freedom. This script will delve into the multifaceted nature of the mind, exploring its inherent complexities, its hidden mechanisms, and its profound influence on our experience of reality. We will journey through the psychological landscapes illuminated by these profound thinkers, seeking not to provide simplistic answers, but to provoke deeper questions, to challenge conventional notions of control, and to ultimately guide you towards a more nuanced, authentic, and perhaps even terrifyingly free relationship with your own consciousness. The path to mastering your mind begins not with conquest, but with understanding, not with suppression, but with integration, and not with certainty, but with the courageous embrace of the unknown. Prepare to descend. The illusion of control, unmasking the ego's tyranny. The very phrase, the illusion of control, unmasking the ego's tyranny. The very phrase, master your mind, is a product of the ego, that fragile yet tyrannical construct that sits at the center of our conscious awareness. The ego, in its relentless pursuit of security and significance, creates the illusion that we are the sole authors of our thoughts, the absolute sovereigns of our internal kingdom. It whispers a seductive narrative of control, of self-determination, of a unified, coherent self that navigates the world with purpose and intention. Yet this is a profound and dangerous deception, a carefully constructed fortress built on the shifting sands of the unconscious, designed to shield us from the terrifying truth of our own fragmentation and the overwhelming vastness of the psyche. To embark on the journey of mastering the mind, we must first dismantle this illusion of control. We must unmask the ego, not as an enemy to be vanquished, but as a well-intentioned yet ultimately limited guide, a gatekeeper who mistakes the foyer for the entire mansion. The ego, as Jung so brilliantly articulated, is merely the center of the conscious field, a small island in the vast ocean of the unconscious. It is the I that we present to the world, the persona we curate, the collection of memories, beliefs, and roles that we identify with. But it is not the totality of who we are. To mistake the ego for the self, the true integrated center of the psyche, is to live in a state of profound psychological ignorance, to be a king ruling over a tiny, barren island, oblivious to the teeming, vibrant continent that lies just beyond the horizon of awareness. The ego's tyranny lies in its fear of the unknown, its desperate need for certainty and predictability. It clings to what is familiar, to what can be categorized, analyzed, and controlled. It constructs rigid belief systems, moral codes, and personal narratives to create a sense of order in a chaotic world. It represses anything that threatens this fragile order: uncomfortable emotions, inconvenient truths, and the wild, untamed impulses that bubble up from the depths of the unconscious. This repression, however, does not make these disowned aspects disappear. It merely pushes them into the shadow, where they fester and grow, often gaining a terrifying autonomy, influencing our behavior in ways we cannot comprehend, and erupting into our conscious lives as neuroses, anxieties, and self-destructive patterns. The silent war inside your mind, the one you are so desperate to win, is often a war waged by the ego against the totality of your own being. It is the ego's desperate attempt to maintain its illusion of control in the face of the overwhelming evidence of its own powerlessness. Consider the simple act of trying to quiet your mind for meditation. The more you try to force silence, the louder the internal chatter becomes. This is the ego's rebellion, its refusal to relinquish its perceived authority. It is a testament to the fact that the mind cannot be controlled through brute force, that true mastery lies not in suppression, but in surrender, in a radical acceptance of the mind's inherent wildness. From an existentialist perspective, the ego's illusion of control is a form of bad faith, a flight from the terrifying freedom and responsibility of authentic existence. By identifying with a fixed, stable self, we attempt to escape the anguish of our own groundlessness, the vertiginous realization that we are not predefined entities, but are constantly creating ourselves through our choices. The ego provides a comforting, albeit false, sense of essence, a pre-written script that absolves us of the burden of authorship. To master the mind in the existential sense is to tear up this script, to embrace the anxiety of freedom, and to courageously step into the void of our own becoming. This unmasking of the ego is not a comfortable process. It is a journey into the heart of our own insecurities, a confrontation with our deepest fears, and a radical questioning of everything we thought we knew about ourselves. It requires a willingness to be vulnerable, to sit with uncertainty, and to embrace the messy, contradictory, and often irrational nature of our own psyche. It is a process of letting go of the need to be right, the need to be in control, the need to have all the answers. It is a surrender to the mystery of our own being, a humble acknowledgement that we are not the masters of our own house, but rather curious explorers in a vast and uncharted territory. So how do we begin this process of unmasking the ego? It starts with mindful observation, with the cultivation of a non-judgmental awareness of our own thoughts and feelings. Instead of identifying with every thought that arises, we learn to witness them as transient mental events, like clouds passing in the sky. We begin to notice the ego's patterns, its defense mechanisms, its subtle manipulations. We see how it clings to certain identities, how it reacts to perceived threats, how it constructs narratives to protect its fragile sense of self. Through this process of detached observation, we create a space between our conscious awareness and the ego's machinations, a space from which true freedom can emerge. This is not a passive process. It is an active engagement with our inner world, a courageous exploration of our own psychological landscape. It involves asking difficult questions. Who am I beyond my roles, my achievements, my beliefs? What am I afraid of? What parts of myself have I disowned? What are the narratives I tell myself about my life, and are they true? This is the work of shadow integration, of bringing the unconscious into the light of consciousness, not to judge or condemn, but to understand and assimilate. It is the path to wholeness, to a more authentic and integrated sense of self, one that is not based on the ego's fragile illusions, but on a deep and abiding connection to the totality of our being. The journey to master your mind then begins with a profound act of rebellion, a rebellion against the tyranny of your own ego. It is a declaration of independence from the illusion of control, a courageous step into the unknown territory of your own psyche. It is a journey that will undoubtedly be fraught with challenges, with moments of doubt, and with the temptation to retreat to the familiar comforts of the ego's fortress. But it is also a journey of profound liberation, of self-discovery, and of a deeper, more authentic connection to the mystery of your own existence. The true master is not the one who controls, but the one who understands, not the one who suppresses, but the one who integrates. The true master is the one who has the courage to be a humble servant to the vast, untamed wilderness of their own mind. The unseen architects navigating the labyrinth of the unconscious. Beneath the thin veneer of our conscious awareness, a vast and ancient realm churns, the unconscious mind. It is the unseen architect of our desires, the silent puppeteer of our fears, and the hidden repository of our deepest truths. To speak of mastering the mind without acknowledging this subterranean empire is akin to attempting to navigate a ship by observing only the ripples on the surface, oblivious to the powerful currents and submerged mountains that dictate its true course. The ego, in its hubris, often denies the unconscious its due, preferring the illusion of rational control. Yet it is within these shadowed depths that the true levers of our being reside, shaping our destinies in ways we rarely comprehend. Carl Jung dedicated his life to mapping this inner cosmos, distinguishing between the personal unconscious, a reservoir of forgotten memories, repressed experiences, and subliminal perceptions unique to each individual, and the collective unconscious, a deeper transpersonal layer shared by all humanity, a repository of archetypes, primordial images, and universal patterns of experience. To master your mind, then, is not merely to gain control over your conscious thoughts, but to embark on a perilous journey into these unconscious realms, to confront the forces that operate beyond the ego's reach, and to integrate their wisdom into your waking life. The most formidable inhabitant of the personal unconscious is the shadow. The shadow is not inherently evil, but rather comprises all the aspects of ourselves that the conscious ego has rejected, disowned, or deemed unacceptable. It is the dark twin, the inconvenient truth, the collection of impulses, desires, and traits that we push into the darkness because they do not align with our idealized self-image or with societal expectations. It holds our unexpressed rage, our unacknowledged envy, our repressed sexuality, our hidden talents, and our deepest insecurities. We deny its existence, yet it exerts a powerful, often destructive influence on our lives, manifesting as irrational fears, sudden outbursts, self-sabotaging behaviors, and a pervasive sense of inner conflict. Consider the individual who prides themselves on their kindness and compassion, yet finds themselves inexplicably drawn to gossip or harboring secret resentments, or the one who champions rationality, yet succumbs to irrational anxieties or compulsive behaviors. These are the subtle machinations of the unintegrated shadow operating from the depths, seeking expression. The ego, in its defense, often employs projection, seeing these disowned qualities in others, vehemently criticizing in them what it refuses to acknowledge in itself. The tyrannical boss, the overly emotional friend, the lazy colleague, these figures often become unwitting screens onto which we project our own unacknowledged shadows, thereby avoiding the painful yet necessary work of self-confrontation. Nietzsche, with his unflinching gaze into the abyss of human nature, understood the power of these subterranean forces. His concept of the Dionysian, the chaotic, instinctual and irrational aspect of existence, can be seen as a philosophical echo of the unconscious. To deny this primal force, to attempt to impose a purely Apollonian, rational, ordered structure on life, is to invite neurosis and a profound sense of alienation from one's own vitality. True mastery for Nietzsche would involve a courageous embrace of this inner chaos, a channeling of its raw energy not into self-destruction, but into self-overcoming, into the creation of a life lived with passion and authenticity, even in the face of suffering. Schopenhauer, too, recognized the unconscious as the primary driver of human action, though he termed it the will. For him, the intellect, the conscious mind, was merely a secondary phenomenon, a tool developed by the will to navigate the world and fulfill its ceaseless, irrational striving. Our desires, our ambitions, our very existence are all manifestations of this blind, insatiable force. To master the mind in this bleak yet profound view would be to gain a momentary respite from the will's relentless demands, to achieve a temporary liberation through aesthetic contemplation or ascetic practices that quiet the clamor of desire. It is a recognition that true freedom lies not in controlling the will, but in understanding its nature and finding ways to disengage from its endless cycle of craving and suffering. The journey into the unconscious is not without its perils. It is a descent into the unknown, a confrontation with the parts of ourselves we have most fiercely defended. It can be disorienting, frightening, and deeply unsettling. The ego, accustomed to its reign, will resist with all its might, throwing up defenses, rationalizations, and distractions. This is why the process of shadow integration often manifests as a crisis, a breakdown that precedes a breakthrough, a period of profound psychological discomfort that forces us to confront what we have long avoided. Yet it is precisely in this confrontation that true mastery begins. To master your mind is not to eliminate the shadow, for it is an inseparable part of your being. It is rather to acknowledge its existence, to understand its language, and to integrate its energy into your conscious life. This involves a radical act of self-acceptance, a willingness to embrace your imperfections, your darker impulses, and your unhealed wounds. It means recognizing that the very qualities you despise in others may be reflections of your own disowned self. It means taking responsibility for your projections, withdrawing them from the external world, and bringing them back into the inner crucible of self-reflection. This integration is a continuous process, not a destination. The unconscious is a dynamic, ever-shifting landscape, and new aspects of the shadow will emerge as we grow and evolve. But with each act of integration, we become more whole, more authentic, and more resilient. We reclaim lost parts of our vitality, our creativity, and our capacity for genuine connection. The energy that was once bound in repression becomes available for conscious use, empowering us to live more fully and purposefully. So, how does one navigate this labyrinth? It begins with paying attention to the subtle whispers of the unconscious, dreams, slips of the tongue, irrational reactions, recurring patterns in relationships, and the qualities that intensely irritate or fascinate us in others. These are breadcrumbs leading into the depths. Practices like active imagination, journaling, and psychotherapy can provide structured ways to engage with these unconscious contents, to give voice to the unvoiced, and to bring the hidden into the light. It is a process of listening, of observing, and of daring to see what lies beneath the surface. To master your mind, then, is to become a conscious explorer of your own inner world, to brave the shadows, and to reclaim the treasures that lie buried within. It is a journey from fragmentation to wholeness, from unconscious compulsion to conscious choice. It is the profound realization that the mind is not just a battlefield, but a sacred space, a temple where the divine and the demonic dance in an eternal embrace. And in understanding this dance, you begin to move with it rather than against it, finding a deeper, more authentic rhythm to your existence. The crucible of suffering, forging consciousness in the fires of pain. To speak of mastering the mind without confronting the inescapable reality of suffering is to engage in a shallow delusion, a saccharine fantasy that crumbles at the first touch of genuine pain. For it is in the crucible of suffering that the mind is truly tested, its illusions shattered, its defenses stripped away, and its capacity for profound transformation revealed. We live in a culture that relentlessly seeks to eradicate pain, to medicate discomfort, and to sanitize the human experience of its inherent anguish. Yet, the great philosophical and psychological traditions, from the ancient Stoics to the existentialists, from the wisdom of the East to the depths of Jungian analysis, consistently point to suffering not as an aberration to be avoided, but as an indispensable forge for the forging of consciousness. Friedrich Nietzsche, with his unflinching gaze into the abyss, declared that what does not kill me makes me stronger. This is not a glib platitude, but a profound assertion of the transformative power of adversity. For Nietzsche, suffering was not merely a negative experience, but a necessary condition for growth, for the overcoming of the self, for the creation of new values. The mind that seeks to master itself must not shy away from pain, but rather embrace it as a teacher, a catalyst for deeper insight and greater resilience. To deny suffering is to deny a fundamental aspect of human existence, to remain perpetually stunted, perpetually naive, perpetually uninitiated into the deeper mysteries of being. Arthur Schopenhauer, though often labeled a pessimist, offered a stark yet illuminating perspective on suffering. For him, suffering is inherent to existence, a direct consequence of the blind, ceaseless striving of the will. Our desires, our attachments, our very individuality are all sources of pain, for they bind us to a world of endless craving and inevitable disappointment. To master the mind, in Schopenhauer's view, is to recognize this fundamental truth, to disengage from the relentless pursuit of fleeting pleasures, and to find a temporary respite from the will's tyranny through aesthetic contemplation, compassion, or ascetic detachment. It is a form of mastery that acknowledges the mind's subservience to a deeper, irrational force and seeks wisdom not in control but in a profound understanding of its own limitations. Consider the profound impact of trauma not merely as a wound to be healed, but as a dark initiation, a forced descent into the underworld of the psyche. Gabor Mate, through his compassionate work, reveals how unaddressed trauma shapes the mind, creating patterns of thought and behavior designed to cope with unbearable pain. The compulsive behaviors, the self-sabotaging narratives, the emotional numbness, these are often desperate attempts to master an unmasterable past. Yet true mastery begins when we cease fighting the echoes of trauma and instead turn towards them with curiosity and compassion. It is in the willingness to feel the unfelt, to grieve the ungrieved, and to acknowledge the brokenness within that the process of integration and healing truly begins. The mind, having been fragmented by pain, can only become whole by embracing its own shattered pieces. Jungian psychology too emphasizes the transformative role of suffering in the process of individuation. The journey towards wholeness often involves a confrontation with the shadow, with the aspects of ourselves that we have repressed and disowned. This confrontation is inherently painful as it forces us to acknowledge our imperfections, our darker impulses, and our unhealed wounds. The ego, in its defense, will resist this descent, preferring the comfortable illusion of its own perfection. But it is precisely in this resistance, in this internal struggle, that the potential for growth lies. The mind, when forced to grapple with its own contradictions and its own capacity for both good and evil, expands its capacity for consciousness, for empathy, and for a deeper understanding of the human condition. The suffering that arises from existential angst, the confrontation with meaninglessness, the burden of freedom, and the inevitability of death is another crucible for the mind. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that we are condemned to be free, meaning we are absolutely responsible for creating our own meaning in a world devoid of inherent purpose. This realization can be terrifying, leading to a profound sense of anguish and despair. Yet it is precisely in this anguish that the opportunity for authentic existence arises. To master the mind in this context is not to escape the anguish, but to embrace it, to courageously choose our values, and to forge our own meaning in the face of an indifferent universe. It is a mastery born not of comfort, but of radical responsibility. The mind, in its attempts to avoid suffering, often creates more suffering. It ruminates on past pains, anticipates future anxieties, and constructs elaborate narratives of victimhood or self-pity. This mental clinging to pain, this refusal to let go, perpetuates a cycle of misery. True mastery, then, involves a radical shift in our relationship to suffering. It is not about becoming impervious to pain, but about cultivating a non-reactive awareness, a capacity to witness our own suffering without being consumed by it. It is the ability to feel deeply, to grieve fully, and to experience the full spectrum of human emotion without allowing these experiences to define or imprison us. This transformation is not achieved through intellectual understanding alone. It requires a profound shift in our being, a willingness to descend into the depths of our own experience, to sit with discomfort, and to allow the fires of pain to burn away the dross of illusion. It is a process of surrender, not to external forces, but to the inherent wisdom of the psyche, which knows that growth often emerges from breakdown and that light can only be truly appreciated in the presence of darkness. So, how does one navigate this crucible? It begins with cultivating presence, with the radical act of staying with what is, even when what is painful. It involves practices like mindfulness and meditation, which train the mind to observe its own contents without judgment or attachment. It requires self-compassion, a willingness to treat ourselves with the same kindness and understanding we would offer a beloved friend. It demands courage, the courage to feel, to heal, and to grow, even when every fiber of our being screams for escape. To master your mind, then, is to embrace suffering, not as a curse, but as a teacher, a guide, a necessary passage through the dark night of the soul. It is to understand that the deepest insights, the most profound transformations, and the most authentic forms of freedom are often forged in the fires of pain. It is a mastery born not of avoidance, but of courageous engagement, a testament to the human spirit's indomitable capacity for resilience, for growth, and for finding meaning even in the heart of despair. The mind that has truly been mastered is not one that is free from suffering, but one that has learned to dance with it, to learn from it, and to emerge from its embrace with a deeper, more compassionate and more conscious understanding of itself and the world. The architect of reality, deconstructing narratives and beliefs. The human mind is not merely a passive recipient of reality, but an active architect, constantly constructing and reconstructing the world through the intricate loom of narratives and beliefs. We are, each of us, storytellers, weaving intricate tapestries of meaning from the raw threads of experience. These stories, whether conscious or unconscious, become the very lens through which we perceive ourselves, others, and the world at large. To speak of mastering the mind without a profound understanding of this fundamental process of reality construction is to remain perpetually enslaved by the fictions we unwittingly create. The mind, in its relentless quest for coherence, abhors a vacuum and will readily fill any void with narratives, however distorted, however self-limiting. Consider the pervasive power of personal narratives. We tell ourselves stories about who we are. I am a victim. I am a survivor. I am not good enough. I am destined for greatness. These narratives, often forged in the crucible of early experiences, become self-fulfilling prophecies, shaping our perceptions, influencing our choices, and ultimately dictating the trajectory of our lives. The mind, in its loyalty to these established stories, will actively seek out evidence to confirm them and subtly filter out anything that contradicts them. This is the insidious grip of confirmation bias, a cognitive trap that ensures our reality remains a faithful reflection of our deepest, often unconscious beliefs. Nietzsche, with his radical perspectivism, understood that there are no objective facts, only interpretations. The mind, for him, is a perpetual interpreter, constantly imposing meaning onto a chaotic, meaningless universe. To master the mind, then, is not to discover some ultimate truth, but to become a conscious artist of interpretation, to choose the narratives that empower us, that affirm life, that lead to growth and self-overcoming. It is a call to question every inherited belief, every societal dogma, every personal story that diminishes our vitality. Become who you are, he urged, a process that necessitates the courageous deconstruction of all that you are not, all the narratives that have been imposed upon you. Jung, too, recognized the profound influence of collective narratives or archetypes, which reside in the collective unconscious. These universal patterns of experience, the hero, the shadow, the great mother, the wise old man, shape our myths, our religions, and our personal stories. While they provide a framework for understanding the human experience, they can also become rigid prisons if we remain unconscious of their influence. To master the mind in this context is to become aware of the archetypal forces at play within our own lives, to differentiate between the universal pattern and our unique individual expression, and to consciously choose how we engage with these powerful, primordial narratives. The mind's construction of reality is also deeply intertwined with its relationship to the past. Our memories are not static recordings, but dynamic, reconstructive processes, constantly being re-edited and reframed by our present beliefs and emotional states. The misinformation effect demonstrates how easily our memories can be altered by new information, highlighting the fragile and malleable nature of our personal histories. The mind, in its desire for coherence, will often create narratives that seamlessly connect disparate events, even if those connections are illusory. To master the mind, then, is to recognize the reconstructive nature of memory, to release the grip of past narratives that no longer serve us, and to understand that while the past has shaped us, it does not define our present or limit our future. This process of deconstructing narratives and beliefs is inherently unsettling. It requires a willingness to sit in the discomfort of uncertainty, to acknowledge that the foundations of our perceived reality may be built on sand. The ego, in its desperate need for stability, will resist this dismantling, often clinging fiercely to even painful narratives because they offer a sense of familiarity and control. The mind, when confronted with the dissolution of its cherished stories, can experience a profound sense of disorientation, an existential vertigo that challenges its very sense of identity. Yet it is precisely in this void, in the space created by the deconstruction of old narratives, that true freedom emerges. When we release the grip of limiting beliefs, when we question the stories that have held us captive, we open ourselves to new possibilities, to alternative interpretations, to a reality far more expansive and dynamic than we ever imagined. This is the essence of cognitive restructuring, a core principle in therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which teaches us to identify and challenge irrational or unhelpful thought patterns that perpetuate emotional distress. It is an active, conscious effort to rewrite the internal script, to choose narratives that align with our deepest values and aspirations. To master your mind, then, is to become a discerning editor of your own reality. It is to cultivate a critical awareness of the stories you tell yourself, the beliefs you hold, and the narratives that shape your perceptions. It is to question, to challenge, and to ultimately choose the interpretations that empower you, that foster growth, and that lead to a more authentic and fulfilling existence. This is not about self-deception, but about conscious self-creation. It is the profound realization that while we may not control the events of our lives, we possess the ultimate power to control the meaning we ascribe to them. And in that power lies the true mastery of the mind, the ability to architect a reality that serves your highest potential rather than imprisoning you within the confines of inherited or self-imposed fictions. The temporal prison, the mind, mortality, and the tyranny of time. The human mind, in its ceaseless activity, is inextricably bound to the concept of time, a construct both liberating and imprisoning. We live in a perpetual present, yet our minds are constantly oscillating between the ghosts of the past and the phantoms of the future. This temporal dance, while essential for planning and learning, often becomes a tyranny, a relentless reminder of our finitude and a source of profound anxiety. To speak of mastering the mind without confronting its intricate relationship with time, and by extension with mortality, is to ignore the very existential ground upon which our consciousness stands. The mind, in its desperate attempt to escape the inevitable, often constructs elaborate illusions, creating a temporal prison of regret and anticipation. Consider the mind's relentless grip on the past. We ruminate on perceived failures, replay painful memories, and cling to bygone glories, allowing these echoes to define our present reality. This is the insidious nature of rumination, a mental loop that traps us in a cycle of regret and self-recrimination. The mind, in its attempt to make sense of what has been, inadvertently prevents us from fully inhabiting what is. This clinging to the past is often a defense mechanism against the terrifying uncertainty of the present and the unknown abyss of the future. It is the ego's desperate attempt to find security in what is already known, even if that knowledge is a source of pain. Conversely, the mind is equally adept at projecting itself into the future, constructing elaborate scenarios of success or catastrophe. We anticipate, we plan, we worry, we hope, often sacrificing the richness of the present moment for the promise or threat of what is yet to come. This future orientation, while vital for survival and progress, can devolve into chronic anxiety, a pervasive sense of dread about what might be. The mind, in its attempt to control the uncontrollable, becomes a prisoner of its own projections, forever chasing a horizon that recedes with every step. The tyranny of time manifests as a perpetual state of not yet, a deferral of true living until some idealized future arrives. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist, would highlight this temporal anguish as a core aspect of human freedom. We are condemned to be free, meaning we are constantly choosing ourselves in every moment, and this choice extends into our relationship with time. To live authentically is to embrace the present, to acknowledge the fluidity of our being, and to take responsibility for our choices without clinging to the past or escaping into the future. The mind's mastery in this view is not about controlling time, but about liberating oneself from its psychological grip by fully inhabiting the now. with all its inherent uncertainty and responsibility. But the ultimate temporal prison is the mind's confrontation with mortality. The awareness of our own finitude, the knowledge that our existence is bounded by death, is a uniquely human burden. The mind, in its innate drive for self-preservation, recoils from this truth, constructing elaborate defense mechanisms to deny or postpone the inevitable. We immerse ourselves in distractions, pursue immortality projects, legacy, fame, material accumulation, or cling to comforting illusions of an afterlife. This existential dread, often operating beneath the surface of conscious awareness, fuels much of our striving, our anxieties, and our desperate attempts to control life. Ernest Becker, in his seminal work, The Denial of Death, argued that human civilization itself is an elaborate defense mechanism against the terror of mortality. Our cultures, our religions, our ideologies, all serve to provide us with a sense of significance, a symbolic immortality that transcends our biological limitations. The mind, in its quest for meaning, creates these grand narratives to shield us from the terrifying reality of our own insignificance in the face of cosmic indifference. To master the mind, then, is to courageously confront this denial, to look unflinchingly at the abyss of non-being, and to find a way to live fully and meaningfully within the confines of our finite existence. This confrontation with mortality is not about cultivating a morbid obsession with death, but about recognizing its profound power to illuminate life. When the mind accepts its temporal limitations, it can paradoxically become more present, more appreciative of each fleeting moment, and more aligned with its deepest values. The urgency of life, often dulled by the illusion of endless time, becomes sharply focused. Priorities shift, trivial concerns fade, and the pursuit of authentic experience takes precedence over the accumulation of external markers of success. So, how does one liberate the mind from this temporal prison? It begins with cultivating mindfulness, the radical act of bringing non-judgmental awareness to the present moment. This practice, rooted in ancient wisdom traditions, trains the mind to observe its own temporal oscillations without getting caught in their currents. We learn to witness thoughts of the past and future as mere mental events rather than identifying with them as our ultimate reality. Through consistent practice, the mind gradually loosens its grip on regret and anticipation, finding a deeper sense of peace and presence in the here and now. It also involves a conscious process of acceptance of what has been, acceptance of what is, and acceptance of what will inevitably be. This is not passive resignation, but an active embrace of reality with all its imperfections and uncertainties. It means forgiving ourselves for past mistakes, releasing the need to control the future, and surrendering to the natural rhythms of life and death. This radical acceptance allows the mind to release the immense energy bound in resistance, freeing it for more creative and purposeful engagement with the world. To master your mind, then, is to become a conscious steward of your own temporal experience. It is to understand that while time flows relentlessly onward, your relationship to it is a matter of choice. It is to courageously confront the specter of mortality, not to be paralyzed by it, but to be galvanized by its profound truth. It is a mastery born not of control over the external clock, but of liberation from the internal prison of past and future. And in that liberation, the mind finds its deepest freedom, its most profound peace, and its most authentic expression of life, lived fully and consciously in the precious, fleeting now. The embodied mind, beyond the brain, into the flesh. For centuries, Western thought has perpetuated a profound schism. The mind as a disembodied entity, a ghost in the machine, separate from the crude mechanics of the flesh. This Cartesian dualism, while offering a comforting illusion of Intellectual purity has profoundly distorted our understanding of consciousness, leading us to believe that mastery of the mind is an exclusively cerebral affair, divorced from the visceral realities of our physical existence. Yet to truly master your mind, you must first shatter this illusion, recognizing that the mind is not merely in the body, but is profoundly of the body, an emergent property of our embodied experience, inextricably linked to the very cells, sinews, and sensations that comprise our being. Modern neuroscience, challenging centuries of philosophical dogma, increasingly points to the concept of embodied cognition. This paradigm asserts that our cognitive processes, our thoughts, emotions, perceptions, and even our abstract reasoning are deeply rooted in our bodily interactions with the world. The mind is not a detached observer, but an active participant, constantly receiving feedback from the body, shaping and being shaped by its physical state. To ignore the body in the pursuit of mental mastery is to fight a battle with one hand tied behind your back, to attempt to control a symphony by silencing half the orchestra. Consider the profound impact of physical states on mental clarity. A mind starved of sleep, fueled by processed foods, or burdened by chronic tension, is a mind in disarray, prone to anxiety, irritability, and cognitive fog. Conversely, a body nourished, rested, and moved with intention fosters a mind that is alert, calm, and capable of sustained focus. The ancient wisdom traditions, long before the advent of neuroscience, understood this intrinsic connection. Yoga, Tai Chi, martial arts, and various forms of contemplative movement are not merely physical exercises. They are practices designed to integrate mind and body, to cultivate a holistic awareness that transcends the artificial boundaries of dualistic thought. Nietzsche, with his radical affirmation of life and the body, would vehemently reject the notion of a disembodied mind. For him, the body was the great reason, a source of wisdom far more profound and ancient than the intellect. The ascetic ideal, which sought to subjugate the body for the sake of the spirit, was, in his view, a life-denying pathology. True mastery for Nietzsche would involve a profound respect for the body, a listening to its instincts, and a channeling of its raw vitality into creative expression. To master the mind, then, is to master the body, not through suppression, but through integration, through a joyous embrace of our animal nature. Schopenhauer, despite his pessimism, also acknowledged the body as the primary manifestation of the will. While the intellect might attempt to rationalize and control, it is the body, with its drives and desires, that truly expresses the fundamental striving of existence. To find moments of respite from this relentless will, Schopenhauer suggested, one might turn to aesthetic contemplation, which temporarily suspends the will's demands. However, even this contemplation is experienced through the embodied senses, highlighting the inescapable connection between mind and flesh. The body is not merely a vessel for the mind, it is the very ground of its being, the canvas upon which consciousness paints its fleeting images. Gabor Mate's work on trauma further illuminates this profound connection. Trauma, he argues, is not merely a psychological event, but a deeply embodied experience, stored in the nervous system, manifesting as chronic illness, addiction, and a pervasive sense of disconnection from oneself. The mind, in its attempt to cope with unbearable pain, often dissociates from the body, creating a chasm between thought and sensation. To heal the mind in this context is to heal the body, to gently re-establish connection with its sensations, to release the stored tension, and to reclaim the wisdom of its innate intelligence. True mental mastery, then, becomes an act of profound self-compassion, a journey of reintegrating the fragmented self through the wisdom of the body. The mind's relationship with the body is a two-way street. Not only does the body influence the mind, but the mind, through its thoughts and emotions, profoundly impacts the body. Chronic stress, fueled by anxious thoughts and unresolved emotional conflicts, can manifest as physical ailments, from digestive issues to cardiovascular disease. The placebo and nocebo effects vividly demonstrate the mind's astonishing capacity to heal or harm the body through belief and expectation alone. This is not some mystical phenomenon, but a testament to the intricate neurobiological pathways that connect our thoughts and feelings to our physiological states. To master your mind, therefore, requires a radical re-evaluation of your relationship with your body. It demands a shift from viewing the body as a mere vehicle or a source of inconvenience to recognizing it as an intelligent, sentient partner in the dance of consciousness. This involves cultivating interoception, the ability to sense and interpret the internal state of your body. It means listening to its whispers, honoring its needs, and responding to its signals with wisdom and compassion. It involves engaging in practices that foster embodied awareness, conscious breathing, mindful movement, and a deep appreciation for the miraculous complexity of your physical form. This embodied approach to mental mastery is not about achieving some idealized physical state, but about cultivating a profound sense of presence within your own flesh. It is about releasing the mind's tendency to escape into abstract thought or future projections, and instead grounding yourself in the here and now of your sensory experience. It is about recognizing that your emotions are not just mental constructs, but embodied sensations felt in the gut, the chest, the throat. By learning to feel these sensations without judgment, by allowing them to move through you, you begin to release the energetic blockages that keep the mind in a state of perpetual agitation. So how does one begin this journey of embodied mastery? It starts with simple acts of conscious attention, noticing the rhythm of your breath, the sensation of your feet on the ground, the subtle shifts in your posture. It involves engaging in physical activities that bring you joy and connect you to your body's innate wisdom. It requires a commitment to nourishing your body with wholesome food, adequate rest, and mindful movement, and it demands a willingness to sit with discomfort, to feel the raw sensations of pain or anxiety, knowing that these are not enemies to be vanquished, but messengers from the depths of your embodied self. To master your mind, then, is to master your body, not through rigid control, but through a profound and compassionate integration. It is to understand that the path to psychological wholeness is paved with flesh and bone, with breath and sensation. It is a mastery born not of disembodiment, but of a radical reconnection to the very ground of your being, a profound affirmation of life in all its messy, visceral, and miraculous complexity. The mind that has truly been mastered is one that is deeply rooted in the wisdom of the body, a consciousness that dances in harmony with the rhythms of the flesh, finding its deepest peace, not in escape, but in the full and courageous embrace of its own embodied existence. The collective unconscious, the mind as a nexus of shared humanity. The human mind, in its intricate dance of individuality, is never truly isolated. It is a nexus, a pulsating node within a vast, invisible web of shared consciousness, the collective unconscious. To speak of mastering the mind as a purely personal endeavor, divorced from the profound influence of the collective, is to misunderstand its very nature, to ignore the ancient currents that flow through its deepest channels. We are born into a world saturated with meaning, shaped by millennia of human experience, and imprinted with patterns of thought and behavior that transcend our individual biographies. The mind, in its quest for mastery, must confront not only its personal demons, but also the archetypal forces and societal narratives that subtly, yet powerfully, dictate its perceptions and limit its freedom. Carl Jung, the architect of the collective unconscious, understood that beneath the personal layers of our psyche lies a deeper transpersonal stratum, a universal reservoir of images, symbols, and patterns inherited from the entire history of humanity. These are the archetypes: the hero, the shadow, the great mother, the wise old man, the trickster, the animus. They are not inherited ideas, but inherited predispositions to respond to the world in certain ways, primordial forms that give shape to our myths, our religions, our dreams, and our collective narratives. To master the mind, then, is to become aware of these unseen architects, to differentiate between the personal and the archetypal, and to consciously engage with these powerful forces rather than being unconsciously compelled by them. Consider the pervasive influence of societal narratives on our individual minds. From birth, we are immersed in a cultural matrix that defines what is good, what is bad, what is desirable, what is shameful. These collective beliefs, often unexamined, become the very fabric of our perceived reality, shaping our values, our aspirations, and our sense of self-worth. The mind, in its desire for belonging and acceptance, often internalizes these narratives without question, becoming a willing participant in its own conditioning. This is the subtle tyranny of the collective, a form of mental imprisonment that is all the more insidious because it feels like freedom. Nietzsche, with his fierce critique of herd morality, would rail against this collective conditioning. For him, the masses, driven by resentment and a fear of individual greatness, create systems of values that suppress the will to power, that promote mediocrity and conformity. The mind that seeks mastery, in the Nietzschean sense, must courageously break free from these collective chains, to become a free spirit, to create its own values, its own meaning, in defiance of the prevailing dogma. It is a radical act of self-overcoming, a solitary journey into the wilderness of one's own truth, often met with scorn and misunderstanding from the very collective it seeks to transcend. Aldous Huxley, in his chilling dystopian novel Brave New World, painted a vivid picture of a society where the collective mind is meticulously engineered, where individuals are conditioned from birth to conform to their assigned roles, to embrace superficial pleasures, and to suppress any genuine emotional or intellectual dissent. The mind, in this manufactured paradise, is not mastered by the individual but by the state, a chilling reminder of the dangers of an uncritical acceptance of collective narratives. His work serves as a stark warning. The pursuit of collective harmony, if it comes at the cost of individual consciousness and authentic freedom, is a form of profound psychological enslavement. The mind's vulnerability to collective influence is also evident in phenomena like mass hysteria, groupthink, and the spread of ideological contagions. When individuals surrender their critical faculties to the collective, the mind becomes susceptible to irrational fears, unfounded beliefs, and destructive impulses. The line between personal thought and collective delusion blurs, and the individual mind, once a bastion of independent thought, becomes a mere echo chamber for the prevailing consensus. To master the mind, then, is to cultivate a robust sense of intellectual autonomy, to question authority, to think critically, and to resist the seductive siren call of the herd. This is not to say that the collective is inherently negative. The collective unconscious is also the source of profound wisdom, creativity, and connection. It is the wellspring of our shared humanity, the ground from which empathy, compassion, and altruism emerge. The challenge lies not in rejecting the collective, but in discerning its influence, in separating the life-affirming archetypes from the destructive cultural complexes, and in consciously choosing how we engage with its powerful currents. So, how does one navigate this complex relationship between the individual mind and the collective? It begins with self-awareness, with a deep introspection into the origins of our beliefs, our values, and our emotional responses. We must ask, are these truly my thoughts, or are they echoes of collective conditioning? Are these my desires, or are they manufactured by societal pressures? This process of self-inquiry, often uncomfortable, is essential for disentangling the personal from the collective. It also involves cultivating critical thinking, the ability to analyze information, to identify biases, to evaluate evidence, and to form independent judgments. In an age of information overload and pervasive propaganda, this capacity is more vital than ever. It is the mind's defense against manipulation, its shield against the insidious influence of unexamined collective narratives. Furthermore, engaging in shadow work on a collective level is crucial. Just as individuals have a personal shadow, so too do societies and cultures. These collective shadows, the historical traumas, the repressed injustices, the unacknowledged prejudices, exert a powerful influence on the present, often manifesting as social unrest, political polarization, and a pervasive sense of collective neurosis. To master the mind, then, is to participate in the collective healing, to bring consciousness to these shared wounds, and to work towards a more integrated and compassionate humanity. To master your mind, then, is to understand its profound connection to the collective, to recognize the unseen architects that shape its perceptions, and to consciously choose your relationship with the vast web of shared consciousness. It is a mastery born not of isolation, but of discerning engagement, a profound act of intellectual and spiritual autonomy in a world that constantly seeks to define and control. And in that conscious engagement, the individual mind becomes not merely a recipient of collective influence, but a powerful agent of transformation, capable of contributing to the evolution of consciousness itself. The alchemical fire, creativity, chaos, and the transcendent function within the labyrinth of the human mind, amidst the shadows of the unconscious and the tyranny of the ego, lies a sacred fire, the creative impulse. This is not merely the domain of artists and poets, but a fundamental human capacity, a powerful force that can transform suffering into meaning, chaos into order, and fragmentation into wholeness. To speak of mastering the mind without acknowledging its creative potential is to overlook its most profound and mysterious power, for it is in the act of creation that the mind transcends its own limitations, becoming a channel for something larger than itself, a crucible for the alchemical process of transformation. Jung, with his deep understanding of the psyche's innate drive towards wholeness, termed this process the transcendent function. This is the mind's remarkable ability to reconcile the opposites, to create a synthesis between the conscious and the unconscious, between the rational and the irrational, between the personal and the archetypal. It is a process that often emerges from a state of conflict, of tension, of being caught between two seemingly irreconcilable poles. The mind, in its attempt to resolve this tension, does not simply choose one side over the other, but creates a third, a new symbol, a new insight, a new way of being that transcends the original conflict. This is the essence of psychological growth, and it is a fundamentally creative act. Consider the artist who, tormented by personal demons, channels their pain into a work of art that resonates with universal human experience. Or the scientist who, grappling with a complex problem, has a sudden flash of insight, a creative leap that connects disparate ideas in a new and elegant way. These are not mere acts of intellect, but manifestations of the transcendent function, where the conscious mind, having exhausted its resources, opens itself to the wisdom of the unconscious, allowing a new synthesis to emerge. To master the mind, then, is not to impose a rigid order, but to cultivate the conditions under which this transcendent function can flourish. Nietzsche, too, saw creativity as the ultimate expression of the will to power, the highest form of self-overcoming. For him, the Übermensch, the overman, is not a master in the sense of domination, but a creator, an artist of life who forges their own values, their own meaning in a godless universe. This creative act is born not of comfort, but of a courageous embrace of suffering, of chaos, of the Dionysian abyss. The mind that seeks mastery must be willing to dance on the precipice of madness, to shatter old tablets of law, and to give birth to a dancing star from the chaos within. It is a mastery that is not static, but dynamic, a perpetual process of self-creation and self-transcendence. The creative process, however, is often fraught with peril. It requires a willingness to venture into the unknown, to surrender to the unpredictable currents of the unconscious, and to tolerate the anxiety of not knowing. The ego, with its need for control and certainty, often resists this surrender, clinging to familiar patterns and established forms. This is the source of creative blocks, of perfectionism, of the fear of failure that can paralyze the mind and stifle its creative impulse. To master the mind in a creative sense is to learn to quiet the ego's incessant demands, to trust the process, and to allow the unknown to emerge. This is not a passive process of waiting for inspiration to strike. It is an active engagement with the inner world, a conscious dialogue with the unconscious. Practices like active imagination, dream work, and free association can provide pathways into this creative realm, allowing the mind to access the rich, symbolic language of the psyche. It is a process of listening, of playing, of being open to the unexpected, and of having the courage to give form to what emerges from the depths. The mind's relationship with creativity is also deeply intertwined with its capacity for play. In a world obsessed with productivity and efficiency, play is often dismissed as frivolous, as a childish indulgence. Yet it is in the spirit of play, of curiosity, of experimentation, of non-goal-oriented exploration, that the mind is most free, most open, and most creative. To master the mind is to reclaim this capacity for play, to release the grip of seriousness, and to approach life with a sense of wonder and adventure. It is in the playful engagement with ideas, with materials, with relationships that the transcendent function is most likely to be activated. Furthermore, the creative act is not limited to the production of external works of art. The ultimate creative project is the self. To master the mind is to become a conscious artist of your own life, to shape your character, to cultivate your virtues, and to live in a way that is a true and authentic expression of your deepest values. This is the essence of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you are meant to be. It is a creative journey that requires courage, self-awareness, and a profound commitment to growth. So, how does one cultivate this alchemical fire within the mind? It begins with creating space for solitude, for reflection, for unstructured time. In a world of constant distraction, this is a radical act. It involves nourishing the mind with rich and diverse experiences, with art, with nature, with literature, with philosophy, to provide the raw materials for creative synthesis. It requires a willingness to embrace imperfection, to see mistakes not as failures but as essential parts of the creative process. And it demands a profound trust in the wisdom of the unconscious, a faith that even in moments of darkness and confusion, a deeper process of transformation is at work. To master your mind, then, is to become a conscious participant in its alchemical process. It is to understand that the mind is not a static entity, but a dynamic, creative force, constantly seeking to reconcile opposites and to give birth to new forms of consciousness. It is a mastery born not of control, but of collaboration, a profound partnership between the conscious and the unconscious, between the known and the unknown. And in that collaboration, the mind becomes not merely a tool for navigating the world, but a sacred space for the creation of meaning, for the transformation of suffering, and for the perpetual unfolding of the human spirit. The digital prison. The mind in the age of information. overload. In the relentless hum of the 21st century, the human mind finds itself ensnared in a new, insidious form of captivity, the digital prison. We have, with eager hands, forged the very chains that bind us, mistaking constant connectivity for genuine connection and an endless stream of information for profound knowledge. To speak of mastering the mind in this hyperstimulated age without confronting the pervasive influence of technology is to ignore the most potent architect of our contemporary consciousness. The mind, once a sanctuary for contemplation, has become a battlefield of notifications, a marketplace of fleeting attention, and a conduit for an unprecedented deluge of data that threatens to drown out the whispers of our own inner wisdom. Aldous Huxley, in his prescient dystopian vision, warned of a future where control is exercised not through overt oppression, but through engineered contentment, where truth is obscured by a flood of irrelevant information, and where genuine thought is replaced by manufactured distraction. While his brave new world depicted Soma as the primary pacifier, our modern equivalent is the ubiquitous screen, the endless scroll, the algorithmically curated feed that promises engagement but delivers fragmentation. The mind, in its insatiable hunger for novelty and stimulation, becomes addicted to this digital soma, sacrificing depth for breadth, presence for performance, and authentic experience for curated spectacle. Consider the erosion of attention, the mind's most precious resource. In a world designed to capture and commodify our focus, sustained concentration becomes an act of rebellion. The constant toggling between tasks, the incessant checking of devices, the fear of missing out, FOMO, these are not merely habits, but symptoms of a mind rewired for superficial engagement, incapable of deep work or profound contemplation. The mind, once capable of holding complex ideas in sustained inquiry, now flits from one fleeting stimulus to the next, its capacity for patience and introspection atrophying under the relentless assault of instant gratification. Nietzsche, with his emphasis on the will to power and the creation of meaning, would undoubtedly view this digital landscape with profound disdain. For him, the constant distraction and the erosion of individual will would represent a triumph of the herd, a further descent into nihilism where individuals are too overwhelmed by external stimuli to forge their own values or engage in the arduous work of self-overcoming. The mind, in this context, becomes a passive consumer rather than an active creator, its potential for greatness diluted by the endless stream of trivialities. Schopenhauer, too, would find validation for his pessimistic worldview in the digital age. The relentless striving of the will, once confined to the physical world, now finds an infinite playground in the virtual realm. The endless pursuit of likes, followers, and digital validation becomes a new manifestation of the insatiable desire that drives all suffering. The mind, in its futile attempt to fill the void with external affirmation, becomes trapped in a cycle of craving and disappointment, perpetually seeking a satisfaction that the digital world can never truly provide. This digital captivity extends beyond mere distraction. It profoundly impacts our sense of self and our relationships. The curated perfection of online personas fosters a culture of comparison, where our self-worth is constantly measured against an idealized, often false, external standard. The mind, in its desperate attempt to keep pace, becomes a performance artist, constantly editing and filtering its own reality, leading to a profound sense of inadequacy and a pervasive anxiety about authenticity. Genuine connection, which thrives on vulnerability and shared presence, withers in the face of superficial digital interactions, leaving the mind feeling profoundly alone, even amidst a sea of virtual contacts. Furthermore, the algorithmic shaping of our information diet creates echo chambers and filter bubbles, reinforcing existing biases and limiting our exposure to diverse perspectives. The mind, once capable of critical inquiry and nuanced understanding, becomes increasingly polarized, its capacity for empathy and intellectual humility eroded by the constant reinforcement of its own preconceived notions. This digital tribalism, fueled by the very systems designed to connect us, further fragments the collective consciousness, making true dialogue and shared understanding an increasingly rare commodity. So, how does one master the mind in this digital age? It begins with a radical act of disengagement, a conscious decision to reclaim your attention, to set boundaries around your digital consumption, and to create sacred spaces for silence and introspection. This is not a rejection of technology, but a reassertion of agency, a declaration that your mind is not for sale, not a commodity to be exploited by the attention economy. It involves cultivating digital literacy, the ability to critically evaluate information, to discern truth from manipulation, and to understand the mechanisms by which algorithms shape our perceptions. This is the mind's defense against the insidious influence of propaganda and the subtle erosion of independent thought. It is a call to intellectual vigilance, a commitment to seeking out diverse perspectives, and a willingness to challenge your own assumptions. It also demands a conscious effort to prioritize authentic connection over superficial interaction. This means investing in face-to-face relationships, engaging in vulnerable conversations, and cultivating communities that foster genuine belonging and mutual support. It is a recognition that the mind, in its deepest essence, is a relational entity, and that true flourishing occurs not in isolation, but in the rich tapestry of human connection. To master your mind in the age of information overload, then, is to become a conscious curator of your own consciousness. It is to understand that the digital world, while offering immense potential, also presents unprecedented challenges to our mental well-being and our capacity for genuine thought. It is a mastery born not of technological avoidance, but of discerning engagement, a profound act of self-preservation in a world that constantly seeks to commodify your attention. And in that conscious curation, the mind becomes not a digital prison, but a sanctuary for profound thought, authentic connection, and the courageous pursuit of a truly human existence. The echo of the void, meaning, purpose, and the existential anguish of the mind. At the deepest core of the human mind, beneath the layers of thought, emotion, and perception, lies an echoing void, the terrifying realization that the universe, in its vast indifference, offers no inherent meaning, no preordained purpose. This existential anguish, a silent scream in the chambers of consciousness, is the ultimate challenge to the mind's quest for mastery. For how can one master a mind that grapples with its own fundamental groundlessness, that yearns for a significance that the cosmos refuses to provide? We are born into a world without a script, without a director, and the mind, in its desperate attempt to fill this void, often constructs elaborate illusions, fragile narratives, and fleeting distractions that ultimately fail to quell the gnawing sense of meaninglessness. Jean-Paul Sartre, the quintessential existentialist, confronted this truth with unflinching honesty. "Existence precedes essence," he declared, meaning that we are born into the world as nothing, and it is through our choices, our actions, and our commitments that we create our own essence, our own meaning. This radical freedom, however, comes with a crushing burden, absolute responsibility. The mind, in its anguish, yearns for a higher authority, a divine blueprint, a pre-written destiny that would absolve it of this terrifying burden. But in a godless universe, there is only the individual, condemned to be free, condemned to forge meaning in the face of an indifferent void. To master the mind, in the Sartrean sense, is to embrace this anguish, to courageously choose one's own values, and to live authentically in a world without inherent purpose. Nietzsche, too, wrestled with the death of God and the ensuing nihilism. For him, the mind's confrontation with meaninglessness was not an end, but a beginning, an invitation to create new values, to become a creator of values in a world where the old ones had crumbled. The will to power, in this context, is not merely a drive for domination, but a profound urge to impose meaning, to give form to the formless, to dance on the edge of the abyss and sing one's own song. The mind that seeks mastery must be willing to shatter old idols, to question every inherited truth, and to courageously forge its own path, even if that path leads into uncharted territory, into the terrifying freedom of self-authorship. Consider the pervasive sense of emptiness that often afflicts the modern mind, even amidst material abundance and technological advancement. This is the echo of the void, the silent cry of a soul starved for meaning. In a secularized world, where traditional frameworks of belief have eroded, many minds find themselves adrift, desperately seeking purpose in external pursuits, career success, material possessions, social validation, fleeting pleasures. Yet these external markers, however dazzling, often prove to be hollow, leaving the mind feeling perpetually unfulfilled, perpetually searching for something more. This existential vacuum can manifest as chronic boredom, a pervasive sense of apathy, or a desperate need for constant stimulation. The mind, unable to sit with its own groundlessness, seeks to fill every moment with noise, with distraction, with activity, anything to avoid the terrifying silence where the void whispers its truth. This is the mind's flight from itself, a refusal to confront the fundamental questions of existence, a desperate attempt to outrun its own shadow. Jung, while acknowledging the personal quest for meaning, also pointed to the collective unconscious as a source of archetypal patterns that can provide a framework for understanding and navigating the human experience. The mind, in its search for meaning, often taps into these universal symbols and myths, finding resonance in stories of heroism, transformation, and the eternal struggle between light and shadow. While these archetypes do not provide pre-packaged answers, they offer a rich symbolic language through which the mind can engage with the profound mysteries of existence, finding personal meaning within a larger, shared human narrative. To master the mind in the face of the existential void is not to find a definitive answer, but to cultivate a profound and courageous relationship with the questions themselves. It is to embrace the inherent ambiguity of existence, to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, and to find meaning not in external certainties, but in the very act of living, of choosing, of creating. It is a mastery born not of intellectual conquest, but of existential courage, a willingness to stand naked before the void and declare one's own purpose. This process involves a radical shift in perspective. Instead of seeking meaning out there, the mind turns inward, recognizing that meaning is not discovered, but created. It is an act of will, a conscious imposition of value onto a world that is inherently value neutral. This is the essence of personal responsibility, the profound realization that the quality of our lives, the depth of our purpose, and the richness of our experience are ultimately our own creation. So how does one cultivate meaning in the face of the void? It begins with self-reflection, a deep inquiry into your own values, your passions, your unique talents, and what truly ignites your soul. What do you care about? What causes you to feel alive? What kind of world do you want to help create? These are not questions to be answered intellectually, but to be felt, to be explored through lived experience. It involves commitment, a willingness to dedicate yourself to something larger than your own immediate gratification. This could be a cause, a relationship, a creative pursuit, a spiritual path. Meaning is often found in service, in contribution, in the act of giving oneself fully to something beyond the confines of the ego. It is in the act of commitment that the mind finds its anchor, its direction, its purpose. And it demands courage, the courage to live authentically, to make choices that align with your deepest values, even when those choices are difficult, even when they go against the grain of societal expectations. It is the courage to embrace the inherent uncertainty of life, to face the inevitability of suffering and death, and to continue creating meaning in the face of it all. This is the ultimate act of defiance against the void, a testament to the human spirit's indomitable capacity for hope and creation. To master your mind, then, is to become a conscious architect of your own meaning, a courageous creator in a universe that offers no pre-written script. It is to understand that the mind's deepest anguish is also its greatest opportunity, the opportunity to forge a life of profound purpose, to illuminate the darkness with the light of your own conscious choices. It is a mastery born not of finding answers, but of living the questions, not of escaping the void, but of dancing within its echoing chambers, and in that dance, discovering the boundless capacity of the human spirit to create, to love, and to find meaning in the very act of being. The paradox of connection, love, vulnerability, and the mind's defenses. The human mind, in its intricate dance of self-preservation, often constructs formidable defenses against its deepest yearning, genuine connection. We crave love, intimacy, and belonging, yet simultaneously fear the vulnerability that such profound connection demands. To speak of mastering the mind without confronting this fundamental paradox, the mind's simultaneous longing for and resistance to authentic relationship, is to ignore a central battleground of the human psyche. For it is in the crucible of connection that the mind's most elaborate illusions are tested, its most cherished defenses exposed, and its capacity for both profound joy and excruciating pain revealed. Consider the myriad ways the mind erects barriers to intimacy. We intellectualize emotions, analyze relationships to death, or retreat into the fortress of our own thoughts, believing that self-sufficiency is the ultimate form of mastery. We project our unhealed wounds onto others, seeing threats where none exist, or clinging to idealized notions of love that inevitably lead to disappointment. The mind, in its fear of rejection, of abandonment, of being truly seen, often chooses the sterile safety of isolation over the messy, unpredictable, yet ultimately life-affirming chaos of genuine human connection. This is the mind's tragic paradox. In its attempt to protect itself from pain, it inadvertently cuts itself off from the very source of its deepest fulfillment. Jung, with his profound understanding of the psyche's relational nature, highlighted the role of the anima and animus, the unconscious feminine and masculine aspects within each individual, in shaping our relationships. When these inner figures remain unintegrated, projected onto external partners, they can lead to profound misunderstandings, unrealistic expectations, and a perpetual cycle of attraction and disillusionment. To master the mind in the realm of connection is to embark on the arduous journey of integrating these inner opposites, thereby freeing our relationships from the burden of unconscious projections and allowing for a more authentic, conscious engagement with others. Schopenhauer, in his bleak assessment of human relationships, might argue that love itself is merely a trick of the will, a biological imperative designed to perpetuate the species, often leading to suffering and disillusionment once its purpose is served. For him, the mind, in its pursuit of romantic ideals, is merely a pawn in a larger, irrational game. While a harsh perspective, it serves as a stark reminder of the mind's capacity for self-deception, for constructing elaborate narratives around primal urges, and for mistaking fleeting passion for enduring connection. To master the mind, then, is to see through these illusions, to understand the deeper currents that drive our relational impulses, and to choose connection not from blind compulsion, but from conscious awareness. Gabor Mate's work on trauma and addiction further illuminates the mind's defensive strategies in relationships. Trauma, he argues, often leads to a profound sense of disconnection from oneself, from one's body, and from others. The mind, having learned that vulnerability is dangerous, builds walls, develops coping mechanisms, and adopts relational patterns that, while protective in the short term, ultimately perpetuate isolation. The fear of intimacy, the inability to trust, the compulsive need for control. These are often echoes of unhealed wounds, manifesting as the mind's desperate attempt to avoid re-experiencing past pain. To master the mind in this context is to embark on a journey of healing, to gently dismantle these defenses, and to cultivate the capacity for secure attachment both with oneself and with others. The act of vulnerability is perhaps the greatest challenge to the mind's defenses. To be vulnerable is to expose oneself, to drop the masks, to reveal the messy, imperfect, and often wounded self to another. It is an act of profound courage, for it risks rejection, judgment, and pain. The mind, conditioned for self-preservation, recoils from this risk, preferring the safety of guardedness, of superficiality, of emotional distance. Yet true connection, true intimacy, can only flourish in the fertile ground of vulnerability. Without it, relationships remain shallow, transactional, and ultimately unfulfilling. This fear of vulnerability is often rooted in the ego's desperate need for control and its terror of being seen as anything less than perfect. The mind constructs an idealized self-image, a persona designed to garner approval and avoid criticism, to reveal the flaws, the insecurities, the messy contradictions beneath this facade feels like a death, a shattering of the carefully constructed identity. Yet it is precisely in this shattering that true connection becomes possible, for it is in our shared imperfection that we find our deepest humanity. So how does one cultivate the courage to connect, to dismantle the mind's defenses against love? It begins with self-compassion, a radical acceptance of your own imperfections, your own wounds, your own humanity. And you cannot offer to another what you cannot offer to yourself. By cultivating kindness and understanding towards your own inner landscape, you create a safe space from which to extend that same compassion outwards. It involves mindful presence in relationships, the conscious act of truly listening, of being fully present with another, without judgment, without agenda, without the mind constantly analyzing or planning its next response. This is the antidote to the digital fragmentation of connection, a return to the ancient art of human presence. And it demands courageous communication, the willingness to express your authentic feelings, your needs, your boundaries, even when it feels uncomfortable or risky. It is the act of speaking your truth, not from a place of blame or demand, but from a place of genuine self-expression. This is the pathway to true intimacy, to a relationship built on honesty, trust, and mutual respect. To master your mind in the realm of connection, then, is to understand its inherent paradox, its longing for love and its fear of vulnerability. It is to courageously dismantle the defenses it has built, to embrace the messy, unpredictable, yet ultimately transformative power of genuine human relationship. It is a mastery born not of control, but of surrender, a profound act of faith in the healing power of connection. And in that surrender, the mind finds its deepest joy, its most profound belonging, and its most authentic expression of its own boundless capacity for love. The unending journey beyond mastery towards wholeness. We began this descent into the labyrinth of consciousness with the aspiration of mastering the mind, a quest often framed as a battle to be won, a territory to be conquered. Yet as we have journeyed through its shadowed corridors, unmasking the ego's tyranny, navigating the unconscious, enduring the crucible of suffering, deconstructing narratives, confronting mortality, embracing the embodied self, discerning collective influences, igniting the alchemical fire of creativity, and braving the digital prison, a profound truth emerges. The mind, in its boundless complexity, is not something to be mastered in the conventional sense, but rather something to be understood, integrated, and ultimately surrendered to. True mastery is not about absolute control, but about a profound and conscious relationship with the wild, untamed wilderness within. To seek absolute mastery, to impose a rigid order on the mind's inherent chaos, is to engage in a futile and ultimately self-defeating endeavor. The mind is a living, breathing, evolving entity, a dynamic interplay of conscious and unconscious forces, a reflection of the cosmos itself. To attempt to fix it, to perfect it, to bend it entirely to the will of the ego, is to deny its very nature, to stifle its vitality, and to cut oneself off from the wellspring of its deepest wisdom. The illusion of control, as we have seen, is the ego's most seductive lie, a promise of security that delivers only fragmentation and perpetual struggle. Carl Jung's concept of individuation offers a more profound vision than mere mastery. It is a lifelong process, an unending journey towards psychological wholeness, where the conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche are integrated, where the ego learns to serve the greater self, and where the individual becomes a unique expression of their deepest potential. This is not a destination to be reached, but a path to be walked, a continuous unfolding, a perpetual becoming. The mind in this context is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived, a sacred space where the divine and the human meet. Nietzsche, with his call to become who you are, echoes this sentiment. Mastery for him is not about taming the will, but about directing its immense power towards self-creation, towards the forging of one's own values and meaning in a world without preordained purpose. It is a radical affirmation of life, with all its suffering and chaos, a courageous dance on the edge of the abyss, where the individual dares to embrace their own groundlessness and to create their own destiny. The mind that has truly been mastered is one that has the courage to be its own God, to live authentically, and to transcend the limitations of inherited morality and conventional thought. Schopenhauer, despite his bleak outlook, offers a crucial insight. The mind's intellectual prowess is ultimately subservient to the blind, irrational will. True wisdom, then, lies not in conquering this will, but in understanding its nature, in finding moments of respite from its relentless demands, and in cultivating a compassionate detachment from its endless cycle of craving and suffering. This is a form of mastery born not of triumph, but of profound acceptance, a recognition of the mind's inherent limitations and its place within a larger, often indifferent, cosmic order. The journey to master your mind, then, is not a linear ascent, but a spiral descent, a continuous process of confronting the shadows, integrating the fragmented parts, and expanding the boundaries of consciousness. It is a path that demands courage, vulnerability, and a relentless commitment to truth. Even when that truth is uncomfortable or unsettling, it requires a willingness to sit with uncertainty, to embrace paradox, and to surrender to the inherent mystery of your own being. So, what does it mean, in the end, to truly master your mind? It means to cultivate a profound and non-judgmental awareness of its contents, its thoughts, its emotions, its impulses, its narratives. It means to understand its mechanisms, its defenses, its illusions, and its profound capacity for both creation and destruction. It means to integrate its disowned parts, to heal its unhealed wounds, and to reconcile its inherent contradictions. It means to liberate it from the tyranny of external influences, from the digital prison, and from the relentless grip of past and future. But most importantly, it means to surrender not to external forces, but to the deeper wisdom of the self, to the innate drive towards wholeness that resides within you. It is a surrender to the flow of life, to the rhythms of change, to the inevitability of suffering and death. It is a surrender to the wild, untamed nature of your own consciousness, allowing it to unfold in its own mysterious way, rather than attempting to force it into a preconceived mold. In this surrender, the mind finds its deepest freedom, its most profound peace, and its most authentic expression. It becomes not a tool to be wielded, but a sacred space to be honored, a living temple where the dance of consciousness unfolds in all its messy, glorious, and terrifying beauty. The journey of mastering your mind is not about becoming perfect, but about becoming whole. It is about embracing your humanity in all its complexity, with all its light and all its shadow. And in that embrace you discover that the true master is not the one who controls, but the one who has the courage to be fully, authentically, and terrifyingly alive. This is the unending journey. This is the path beyond mastery towards wholeness, and it begins and ends within you.